They lied to you about the straight line. Look at any satellite image of modern farmland, from the corn belts of Nebraska to the wheat fields of the Ukraine, and you will see the same monotonous pattern etched into the skin of the earth. Parallel lines, endless and rigid, stretching to the horizon like the bars of a planetary prison. You have been conditioned to believe this geometry is the hallmark of efficiency, a triumph of order over the chaos of nature. But I am here to tell you that the row is not a biological necessity. It is a mechanical scar. The straight line does not exist to serve the plant. It exists solely to serve the tractor. When you plant in rows, you are not farming. You are managing a logistics corridor for heavy machinery. And in doing so, you have surrendered the single most potent weapon in a cultivator's arsenal: geometry. Consider the anomaly of the Parisian maraîchers of the 19th century. In the smog-choked, horse-powered dawn of the industrial age, on the outskirts of Paris, a guild of forgotten soil physicists, they called themselves gardeners, but they were engineers of the highest order. Achieved production yields that modern agricultural universities still struggle to explain without resorting to accusations of exaggeration. On plots often smaller than 2 acres, surrounded by the stone walls of the city, they produced enough vegetables to feed the entire metropolis and export the surplus to London. They didn't use synthetic nitrogen. They did not use pesticides. And most importantly, they did not plant in rows. They understood that a plant is not a soldier marching in formation, but a radial collector of solar energy, a biological antenna tuned to specific frequencies of light and moisture. By forcing plants into isolated linear files, modern agriculture wastes nearly 50% of the available surface area on paths, dead zones of compacted dirt that do nothing but evaporate water and grow weeds. This is the great deception of the Green Revolution. We traded the photosynthetic density of the forest for the ease of the combine harvester. We sacrificed the thermodynamics of the living canopy for the convenience of the spray boom. But what happens when you strip away the diesel-burning crutches of industrial farming and return to the raw physics of spatial organization? You discover that the secret to abundance isn't found in a bag of blue fertilizer salts or a genetically modified seed patent. It is found in the lost mathematics of packing density. We are about to exhume a cultivation method that treats the soil not as a flat surface, but as a 3-dimensional reactor, and the planting pattern not as a grid, but as a hexagonal lattice. You are standing on the edge of a paradigm shift that requires you to forget everything you know about spacing and start thinking about architecture. To understand the magnitude of what we have lost, we must travel back to the soot-stained cobblestones of La Villette in the 1890s. Here, the maraîchers, the market gardeners of Paris, operated a system so intensive that it effectively terraformed the urban landscape. These were not simple peasants hoping for rain. They were master manipulators of fermentation kinetics. They utilized the massive waste stream of the city's horse-drawn transportation, tons of manure, not merely as fertilizer, but as fuel for thermal reactors. By stacking fermenting organic matter beneath glass cloches, they engineered a steady baseline temperature of 25 degrees Celsius in the dead of winter. They didn't just plant seeds in the ground. They planted them in a controlled thermodynamic engine, extending the growing season from 5 months to 12. It was a closed-loop system of physics and biology that required 0 fossil fuels and produced yield densities that would bankrupt a modern Iowa corn farmer. But this wisdom did not fade away naturally. It was murdered by the First World War and the subsequent rise of the chemical age. In the early 20th century, 2 German chemists, Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, unlocked the ability to pull nitrogen from the air and synthesize ammonia. It was a miracle for munitions manufacturing. But when the war ended, the world was left with massive factories designed to produce explosives and no one to bomb. The solution? Rebrand the nitrogen. The very chemical used to manufacture TNT was granulated and sold to farmers as the savior of humanity. This was the pivot point, the moment the soil architect was replaced by the chemical junkie. Suddenly, the intricate physical structure of the soil, the pore space, the capillary action, the gas exchange, didn't matter. Why worry about the tedious craft of building deep, aerobic soil tilth when you could simply blast the land with synthetic salts? The maraîcher method, which relied on the complex interplay of depth and biology, was discarded as archaic labor. The tractor demanded flat, hard ground, and the chemical industry provided the intravenous drip to keep plants alive in that dead medium. We traded the resilience of a biological system for the addiction of a chemical one, forgetting that while you can force a plant to grow with nitrogen, you cannot synthesize the immune system of a forest. We are now farming on life support, and the ghost of La Valette is the only witness to the crime. Now we must descend into the hard mathematics of the soil. This is where the romance of gardening dies, and the physics of efficiency takes over. If you look at a standard agricultural field, you are looking at a square grid, or worse, a series of disconnected parallel lines. In a square grid, if you plant your crops 12 inches apart, the distance between a plant and its neighbor in the row is 12 inches. But the distance to its neighbor across the diagonal is nearly 17 inches. This is a geometric failure. It creates a resource gap, a pocket of soil that is too far for the roots to reach efficiently, yet close enough to evaporate moisture. You are essentially paying taxes on land you're not using. Enter the hexagonal offset, or what mathematicians call triangular tiling. By shifting every second row so that the plant sits in the cleavage of the two plants before it, you abandon the square and adopt the triangle. In this configuration, every single plant is equidistant from its 6 nearest neighbors. This is the geometry of the honeycomb. This is the geometry of molecular crystal structures. Why? Because it is the only way to maximize density without stress. When you switch from rows to a hexagonal lattice, you immediately fit 20% more biomass into the same square footage. Do not gloss over that number. Without buying more land, without hauling more water, without adding a single gram of fertilizer, you have just increased your potential yield by 1/5, simply by respecting the laws of geometry. You have eliminated the dead space of the diagonal and replaced it with productive tissue. This is not agriculture. This is sphere packing, the same mathematical problem that Carl Friedrich Gauss agonized over in 1831. The industrial farmer sees a field as a surface to be driven over. The biological engineer sees it as a volume to be filled. By using the hexagonal deep bed logic, you are maximizing the leaf area index to a point of critical mass, ensuring that for every photon of sunlight that hits your plot, it strikes a chlorophyll molecule, not a patch of bare dirt. You have conquered the horizontal plane with geometry, but now you must conquer the vertical plane with physics. Most modern soil is a crime scene, a shallow layer of pulverized dust sitting on top of a suffocating, impermeable concrete floor known as the hard pan. This hard pan is the result of decades of heavy machinery compressing the earth at a depth of exactly 8 inches. Below this barrier, your land is dead. It is anaerobic, devoid of oxygen, and toxic to root hairs. When you plant in this environment, your roots hit that floor and panic. They turn sideways, tangling with their neighbors, fighting for the same pathetic inch of surface water. This is why industrial crops are so weak. They are shallow-rooted addicts, dependent on constant irrigation, because they cannot access the reserves of the planet. The deep bed is the antidote to this suffocation. We are not merely tilling. We are fracturing the geological horizons to create a vertical aerobic reactor. By mechanically shattering the soil structure to a depth of 24 inches, without flipping the layers and disturbing the microbial hierarchy, we introduce a massive infusion of atmospheric gases into the subsoil. This is where Henry's law of gas solubility becomes your new religion. By increasing the partial pressure of oxygen deep within the profile, you unlock the metabolic rate of nitrifying bacteria that were previously dormant. You turn a cold, dead basement into a hyper-oxygenated lung. This depth also alters the hydrodynamics of your farm. In a standard field, water hits the hardpan and pools, evaporating or rotting the roots. In a deep bed reactor, the soil acts as a massive gravitational wick. The loosened structure holds water against gravity through capillary tension, yet allows excess moisture to drain instantly. You create a sponge that is simultaneously well-drained and moist. During a drought, while your neighbors rue, crops wither on their shallow hardpan skillets. Your plants are driving taproots 2 feet down into a cool, moist reservoir that the sun cannot touch. You have effectively disconnected your food supply from the vagaries of the weather report. You must stop seeing leaves as mere decoration and start seeing them as the valves of a biological engine. In the conventional linear model, plants are isolated islands in a sea of bare dirt. This exposure is catastrophic. Wind scours the soil surface, stripping away moisture and, more critically, blowing away the most precious gas in the agricultural periodic table, carbon dioxide. Soil bacteria are constantly respiring, exhaling massive plumes of CO2 from the earth. In a row crop system, this gas, the very fuel of photosynthesis, is instantly diluted by the ambient breeze and lost to the atmosphere. It is a thermodynamic leak of the highest order. The hexagonal deep bed reactor seals this leak through the phenomenon of canopy closure. By calculating the precise triangular spacing so that the leaves of mature plants barely touch, you create a living atmospheric shield. This is not just about suppressing weeds. It is about gas density physics. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. When the canopy locks together, it forms a lid over the soil, trapping the CO2 exhaling from the microbial reactor below. The gas rises, hits the underside of the leaf canopy, and pools there, creating a hyper-concentrated zone of carbon, right at the stomatal intake valves of your plants. You have effectively built a greenhouse without glass. Under this living roof, the leaf area index, LAI, spikes. The humidity stabilizes, reducing the transpiration stress on the crop, while the CO2 concentration can climb significantly higher than the ambient 415 parts per million found in the open air. This turbocharges the photosynthetic rate, not through chemical stimulants, but by simply refusing to let the fuel escape. While the industrial farmer burns diesel to inject fertilizer, your canopy is silently capturing the exhaust of the earth, recycling the breath of the soil into the body of the plant. If you could peer beneath the soil surface of a conventional farm, you would see a lazy, chaotic sprawl. A cornstalk planted in isolation does not feel the urgency of survival. It senses the empty space around it and spreads its roots laterally, skimming the easy nutrients from the topsoil, like a spoiled child eating only the frosting off a cake. This shallow root architecture makes the plant structurally weak and chemically dependent. It relies on you to feed it because it has never been forced to hunt. But in the high-density lattice of the deep bed reactor, We engineer a completely different biological behavior through the mechanism of root pressure. When you plant according to the hexagonal offset, placing seedlings at the precise threshold of their tolerance, you trigger a primal alarm system within the plant's hormonal network. As the root tips extend and brush against the rhizosphere of their neighbors, a chemical signal is fired. The production of lateral growth auxins is suppressed, and the plant switches its energy allocation to a vertical survival strategy. It realizes there is no room to go wide, so it must go down. This is not competition. This is a forced march into the geological depths. Suddenly, the plant is no longer skimming the surface. It is mining. Driven by this communal pressure, the roots punch through the fracture zones we created in the subsoil, diving 2, 3, sometimes 4 feet deep. At these depths, they access a stratum of mineral density that the surface-tilled crops of industrial agriculture never touch. Magnesium, calcium, and trace elements locked in the substrata. The plant pumps these dissolved minerals upward, not just feeding itself, but pulling the very nutrients of the Earth's crust into the biological cycle. While the industrial farmer buys mineral supplements in plastic jugs, your plants are drilling for them. You have turned your crop into a biological pump, bringing the geology of the deep earth up into the sunlight. Put down the rototiller. That screaming, gas-guzzling machine is not a farm implement. It is an agent of geological chaos. It pulverizes the soil structure, murdering the fungal hyphae networks that took years to build. And worse, it blends the aerobic topsoil with the anaerobic subsoil, creating a confused, bacterial slurry that eventually collapses into cement. We do not blend. We stratify. We are going to perform open-heart surgery on the earth. And for this, you need the silent precision of a flat-headed spade and a digging fork. This is the protocol of double excavation, a manual engineering technique that creates the deep bed reactor without destroying the timeline of the soil. First, you must define the boundaries of your reactor vessel. Mark out a bed exactly 4 or 5 feet wide, no wider. This dimension is non-negotiable. It is the maximum reach of the human arm. Once this bed is dug, no human foot must ever touch its surface again. Every time you step on soil, you exert pressures of up to 10 pounds per square inch, crushing the pore spaces you're trying to create. The bed is a sanctuary. The path is a sacrifice. Begin by digging a trench across the width of the bed, 1 spit, spade depth, deep, and 1 spit wide. Move this removed topsoil to the far end of the bed. You will need it later. Now, look into the trench. You are staring at the subsoil, the compacted hardpan. Do not dig it out. This is where the amateur fails. Instead, drive your digging fork deep into this bottom layer and lever it backward. Crack it. Fracture it. Shatter the compaction, but leave the soil chunks in place. You're introducing air fissures into the deep geology without bringing the mineral-heavy, life-poor subsoil to the surface. You're waking up the basement without evicting the tenants. Once the subsoil is fractured, move to the next strip of topsoil immediately behind your trench. Lift that earth and flip it forward onto the fractured subsoil of the first trench. You have now exposed a new strip of hardpan. Repeat the fracture. Repeat the flip. You are effectively moving the entire topsoil layer forward while shattering the floor beneath it. When you reach the end of the bed, fill the final trench with the soil you moved from the start. Stand back and look. The bed is no longer flat. It has heaved upward, swollen with air, sitting 6 to 8 inches higher than the surrounding ground. You have not added dirt. You have added volume. You have created a raised aerobic sponge ready to receive the geometry of the lattice. You are now standing before a raised bed, that is breathing. It is loose, deep, and charged with potential. But do not ruin this perfection by scattering seeds like a medieval peasant. We are about to overlay a mathematical grid onto a biological surface. For this, you do not need a tape measure, which sags and lies. You need a rigid tool. Go to the hardware shop and cut a simple wooden dowel to the exact center-to-center diameter of your specific crop at maturity. If you are planting lettuce that grows 12 inches wide, your dowel is exactly 12 inches long. This stick is your law. It represents the unchangeable physical reality of the plant's future body. Start at the front left corner of your bed. Place your first seed. Now, lay your dowel flat along the edge of the bed and place the next seed at its end. Continue this across the width of the bed. This is your baseline, the only straight line you will ever draw. Now comes the shift. For the second row, do not start directly behind the first plant. Instead, place your dowel so that one end rests on the first plant of row 1, and the other end rests on the second plant of row 1. The point where the tips of two imaginary dowels would meet, forming a perfect equilateral triangle pointing into the bed, is the home of your next seed. You are planting in the valley of the first row. Proceed across the bed, maintaining this triangulation. You are building a lattice of chainmail. Every seed is now the hub of a 6-spoked wheel, equidistant from every neighbor. As you work your way backward, you will notice the geometry tightening. The soil surface disappears faster than with rows. You are packing circles into a rectangle, the most efficient storage algorithm in the known universe. When these plants erupt, they will not compete. They will tessellate. They will grow until their outer leaves just barely kiss the tips of their neighbors, snapping the canopy shut like the iris of a camera lens at the exact moment of peak photosynthesis. You have programmed the harvest date into the geometry of the sowing. This brings us to the final, uncomfortable question that the agricultural industry has spent billions trying to silence. It is not a question of agronomy, but of morality. For the last century, we have been sold a specific definition of efficiency that is mathematically dishonest. We have been taught that efficiency means producing the maximum amount of calories with the minimum amount of human labor. By this metric, the tractor is king, the chemical sprayer is queen, and the straight line is the law. We have successfully designed a system that allows one man to sit in an air-conditioned cab and manage 1,000 acres of dying soil. But we have paid for this labor efficiency with a catastrophic inefficiency of land, energy, and life. We have saved the human back, but we are bankrupting the planetary surface. The hexagonal deep bed reactor offers a different metric, one that the modern economy despises, because it cannot be patented or mechanized. It demands more from you. It requires the sweat of the double dig, the precision of the triangulation, and the patience of the observer. It asks you to trade the cheap, fossil-fueled horsepower of the engine for the biological horsepower of the microbe. It asks you to stop being a driver and start being a steward. The industrialist looks at a garden and asks, "How fast can I finish this?" The bio-intensive cultivator looks at the same plot and asks, "How much life can this space sustain?" You now possess the blueprint. You understand that the straight line is a scar and the hexagon is a shield. You understand that soil is not a surface to be scratched, but a battery to be charged. The ghost of the Parisian maraîcher is no longer a myth. It is a methodology waiting for your hands. The choice is stark and binary. You can continue to serve the geometry of the machine, laying out your food in lonely, wind-scoured rows that beg for chemical salvation. Or, you can step off the grid, pick up your spade, and embrace the density of the forest. The seeds are in your hand, and the physics are on your side. Do not just plant a garden, build a reactor.